Okay, let's dive in. We hear this term constantly, right? Toxic masculinity. It's everywhere, loaded with negative baggage.
Absolutely. It's become a kind of shorthand.
But let's just pull that label off for a moment.
Yeah.
Think about a real crisis, like survival on the line kind of crisis. Does that capacity for aggression, for, stoicism, does it suddenly flip from being a bad thing to being the only thing that matters?
That's the core tension, isn't it? Imagine society just breaks down.
Yeah.
Chaos.
Yeah.
Who are you banking on? The person offering an empathetic shoulder to cry on? Or the one with maybe calloused hands who can build a damn shelter and defend it?
It's a stark choice when you put it like that.
Well, what's really compelling is how quickly our ideas of what's good or virtuous can just get completely turned upside down by circumstances.
Right.
We aim for a world where, gentleness is key, and that's a noble goal, absolutely.
Sure.
But nature, and frankly, human nature, under extreme pressure, it often plays by a very different rule book, that primal instinct to protect. It's not always pretty. It's definitely not always polite.
I actually saw something like this once, a really bad car wreck.
Yeah.
Horrific. People were just frozen, panicked.
Understandable.
Then this one guy, not exactly known for being Mr. Sensitive, kind of rough around the edges, he just took charge, started barking orders, ripped the car door open, literally dragged people out to safety.
Wow. Decisive action.
Totally. But later, you heard the whispers, right, about his aggression, how forceful he was. But those people he pulled out, they're alive because of that aggression. So is that toxicity? Or was it something, I don't know, more fundamental that really makes you think?
It throws that inherent tension, that conflict in what we expect from men into such sharp focus, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, we say we want men to be sensitive, tuned in emotionally, gentle partners.
Yeah, the ideal modern man.
But then in the same breath, we expect them to be this, unwavering shield when danger hits.
Right, the protector.
Is that even realistic? Can you genuinely be both things fully at the same time? Can a heart that's always worn on the sleeve also wear, heavy armor when needed? Seems like a contradiction.
Think about the heroes we actually celebrate, though. Soldiers hitting a beach under fire, firefighters running into burning buildings, surgeons making these insane life or death cuts.
High-stakes professions, definitely.
Their training is all about drilling out the fear, right? Demanding focus, suppressing emotion when everything's going crazy.
Exactly. Compartmentalization, almost.
So aren't those just socially acceptable arenas for the very traits we slam elsewhere? Is the hero surgeon fundamentally different from the quote-unquote toxic guy who steps up aggressively?
That's a really sharp question, and it leads to another one. What's the potential downside if we, as a society, systematically devalue or even try to suppress these traits we've labeled negative?
What do you mean?
I mean, if we actually manage to dismantle every aspect of what people call toxic masculinity, could we accidentally, neuter our collective ability to respond effectively when real threats emerge, visible threats, invisible ones?
That sounds like a pretty dangerous gamble.
It's a high-stakes one, for sure.
It reminds me of this story, maybe apocryphal, I don't know. A community facing some kind of conflict.
Okay.
Had this beloved community organizer, super kind, compassionate guy. Everyone loved him. But when actual violence broke out, he was just ineffective. Paralyzed, maybe.
Didn't make the switch.
Right? Their survival, the story goes, came down to this other guy. Someone they'd previously kind of ostracized for being too tough, too willing to use force. A bit of a thug, maybe. He organized the defense. They survived because of him. But then, afterwards, they pushed him away again, shunned him for the very qualities that saved their skins.
Wow. That's chilling. What does that tell us about what we really value and maybe when we value it? Does safety trump principle only in the moment?
It forces you to confront that dilemma, doesn't it? Are our morals fixed, or do they bend when survival's on the line? Is masculinity itself the issue, or just its uncontrolled, indiscriminate use?
And when your safety is threatened, personally, does the empathy of your protector matter more than their ability to act decisively, even forcefully?
It feels like a kind of societal delusion sometimes, doesn't it? We preach universal gentleness, which is great, but we live in a world where, say, brutality exists.
It's undeniable.
So demanding that men always be soft. Isn't that like, I don't know, preparing for a knife fight with a pillow? There's a certain madness to that disconnect, maybe.
Well, history is just full of examples where survival didn't hinge on emotional processing groups. Think Thermopylae. Think D-Day.
Right. Intense moments.
Were those moments defined by sensitivity circles and sharing feelings? Or by a grim, focused determination? a capacity for aggression channeled towards a very specific, very brutal goal. Traits we might hesitate to glorify now.
Okay, let's make this personal for the listener.
Yeah.
Think back.
Mm-hmm.
Can you recall a time when someone's sheer resolve, maybe even their almost abrasive determination, actually helped you?
Like a tough boss.
Yeah, or a boss who made a really hard call that saved the project, or a family member who laid down the law when things were chaotic, even if it felt harsh. Looking back, were you maybe glad for that seemingly toxic strength? Be honest with yourself.
It forces you to look at your own internal contradictions, right? We might say we believe one thing, but our actual experiences, our needs in the moment reveal something more complicated.
Like the surgeon example again.
Exactly. Their detachment isn't cruelty, it's necessary. It's
Yeah.
professional distance for a life-saving procedure. Can we maybe apply that thinking to other kinds of behavior? Actions that seem cold but are ultimately protective?
Let's push it further. Imagine the absolute worst. Your child is kidnapped. An unthinkable scenario.
Yeah.
Who do you want on the case? The skilled negotiator, brilliant with empathy and understanding, or someone ruthless, someone willing to do whatever it takes, embodying those traits we usually slap the toxic label on.
Where does your calculation shift when the stakes are that high? It's an uncomfortable question.
And it's fascinating how movies get this, isn't it? The gruff, uncompromising leader in the disaster flick, the one making the tough, maybe even heartless calls.
Often the hero.
We cheer for them, even if their methods are harsh. But then in real life, we judge those same qualities so quickly. Why do we give cinematic absolution for toxic traits in crisis, but condemn them day to day?
It's a double standard, perhaps, reflecting a hidden acknowledgement of necessity.
So is a guy who bottles things up always flawed? Or could that stoicism sometimes be a necessary shield? Is being hyper-competitive always about crushing others? Or can that drive push innovation forward?
Good point. Fuel progress.
Is aggression always evil? Or is it sometimes the only way to stop a bully, the only language understood? And who gets to draw those lines? Usually from a position of safety.
It's absolutely crucial to get past these simple good-bad labels. These traits aren't binary, they exist on a spectrum.
Right.
And their impact, it depends so much on the context, the intention, the control. The real challenge isn't wiping them out, but understanding them, maybe channeling them responsibly.
I mean, personally, I value empathy, emotional intelligence. I really do. But if I'm walking down a dark alley and feel threatened, my gut reaction isn't scanning for the most emotionally available person.
No.
I'm instinctively looking for someone who looks like they can handle trouble. That's primal. And I can't just dismiss that feeling. Have you ever felt that internal conflict, that pull towards something you intellectually question?
Oh, absolutely. And there's a strong evolutionary argument lurking there, isn't there? Throughout human history, certain traits, including aggression, protective instincts, they clearly contributed to survival.
Yeah, you can see that.
Their wild, uncontrolled expression, hugely destructive, obviously, but their complete absence might also have posed massive risks throughout time.
I remember hearing an old soldier say something like, they weren't heroes, they were just young men trained to do terrible things to protect their families, their homes.
That's stark perspective.
Was that conditioning toxic? Or was it a grim necessity born from a world that can be brutally unfair? Where is that line between training someone to protect and creating a monster?
It forces us towards a really uncomfortable truth, doesn't it? Sometimes the capacity for actions we find morally questionable might be the only thing stopping something even worse.
A deterrent.
Yeah, a dark reality maybe, but one we probably can't afford to just ignore or wish away.
And this term toxic masculinity, it's just become such a massive catch-all, hasn't it?
It really has.
Assertiveness gets labeled toxic. Emotional reserve, toxic. Ambition, sometimes toxic. Are we genuinely trying to dismantle harmful behaviors, or are we just uncomfortable with certain styles of masculinity that don't fit our current ideals?
There's a real risk there that the term gets so broad, so diluted, it just loses all meaning. And that actually stops us having productive conversations about specific, actually harmful actions and how to fix them.
Okay, another honesty check for the listener. Have you ever felt that flicker of admiration for raw masculine power?
Like what?
Like watching an athlete push their body to the absolute limit, or a leader making a super decisive, confident move. That raw display. And then maybe felt a little guilty for feeling that admiration. What does that tell you about the wiring underneath all our carefully constructed beliefs about what's right and wrong?
That internal clash, It really highlights how complex we are, how our conscious values might not always align perfectly with our gut reactions or even our attractions.
I knew this firefighter once.
Yeah.
Really quiet guy, never showed much emotion. His wife sometimes felt near the distance.
Okay.
But this guy ran into burning buildings like it was nothing, just pure focused action.
Huh.
Then their own house caught fire one night. Total chaos.
Oh.
He got his whole family out, saved them all, and then
Yeah.
went right back to being his quiet, stoic self. Was that emotional unavailability toxic in that moment, when lives were literally on the line?
It's such a stark example of how situational our judgments are, isn't it? A trait we might criticize day to day can become utterly invaluable, literally life-saving, in a crisis.
So what happens to a society that gets so focused on purging anything deemed toxic that it forgets how to defend itself? If it becomes, I don't know, too soft. History has some pretty chilling examples of what fills that kind of power vacuum.
Yeah, a truly healthy society probably needs a balance of different strengths, different capabilities. If you over-focus on some qualities and demonize others entirely, you might create blind spots, unforeseen vulnerabilities.
And look at the demands we place on men now. Be endlessly empathetic, share everything, be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. The modern expectation.
But also, somehow, bear immense pressure, shield others, never falter when things get tough. Are we setting them up to fail? Are we secretly hoping they'll just quietly carry that toxic burden we don't want to admit is sometimes needed?
There's definitely a potential for hypocrisy there, asking for this impossible tightrope walk between total vulnerability and absolute invincibility.
Think about how civilizations were built. Not just on sensitivity training, right?
Unlikely.
Often it involved huge ambition, ruthless competition, relentless drive traits we now look at with deep suspicion. We sit here enjoying the benefits, the safety, the comfort built on that foundation, and then judge their methods. Is that really progress? Or just convenient historical amnesia?
It's always crucial to try and see historical actions in their own context, right? Understand the values, the pressures, the necessities of that time, even when they clash hard with our views today.
Maybe the whole toxic label is missing the point. Maybe it's not the trait itself that's the poison, but the dosage, the uncontrolled, unwise application of it.
That shifts the focus, doesn't it? Away from just labeling things bad, towards cultivating self-awareness, discipline, responsibility, how to manage these powerful parts of ourselves.
And in our kind of fractured world, who's teaching that wisdom, that control?
A crucial question.
What if some of the men we quickly label toxic are actually just doing the necessary, unpleasant work that keeps the lights on, so to speak, keeps things functioning?
Getting their hands dirty so others don't have to.
Yeah. Does our comfort depend on conveniently demonizing the people doing the hard, maybe morally gray stuff? Are we complicit in that?
We definitely need to check ourselves. Are criticisms always about genuine harm, or are they sometimes just a way to keep uncomfortable realities at arm's length?
So let me ask you directly. Do you still believe strength must always be gentle? That a protector can exist without even a hint of the capacity for something else, something harder?
Well, true strength often includes the potential for force, doesn't it? Even if that potential is never used, its mere existence can be a powerful deterrent. It changes the dynamic.
The world isn't safe because we eliminated all the monsters. That's a fantasy. Sometimes, maybe, it's safer because our monsters are bigger or more disciplined.
That's a terrifying thought.
It is terrifying,
Yeah.
but perhaps sometimes necessary.
It touches on those really complex, uncomfortable dynamics of power, deterrence, and kind of uneasy peace that's sometimes kept through a balance of force.
Okay, bottom line it for yourself, listener.
Right.
When the real crisis hits the fire, the attack, the collapse, who do you really want beside you? The person quoting theory or the person who can act? Be brutally honest.
In those extreme moments, decisive action often outweighs everything else. Intellectual understanding, even emotional support, might take a backseat to pure, effective response.
If this whole conversation has made you question your assumptions, even just a little bit, good. That's the point. Maybe share this. Send it to someone who holds the opposite view. Let that uncomfortable conversation start.
Because engaging with different perspectives, especially challenging ones, is how we grow intellectually, right? Get a more nuanced view.
Could it be, sometimes, that the push for men to be less toxic is actually subtly a desire to make them less powerful, less challenging, easier to manage maybe? Who really benefits if men are tamed?
Any big societal push for conformity for any group deserves a critical look. What are the unintended consequences? Whose interests might it actually be serving?
And which is the greater failure, ultimately? A man who uses traits we call toxic aggression, ruthlessness to protect his family, or a man who is so non-toxic, so passive that he fails to protect them at all. Which failure carries the heavier weight?
These are the agonizing ethical choices, aren't they? Where idealistic frameworks just crumble against harsh realities. There's no easy answer there.
We talk about toxic masculinity like it's some software bug, a virus we could just delete.
Yeah, eradicate it.
But what if it's more like the primal operating system, something fundamental? And trying to delete core code just crashes the whole system, leaves us vulnerable when we need it most.
It's a powerful analogy. It suggests these traits might be more deeply ingrained, maybe harder wired than we like to admit. Suppression alone might not be viable or even safe.
Picture a father defending his child from a serious threat. That raw, unleashed aggression. The absolute willingness to inflict harm, to protect.
Primal.
Is that toxic? Or is that love in its most terrifying fundamental form? Could you honestly stand there in that moment and condemn that instinct?
The lines just blur completely in situations like that, don't they? Between what society deems acceptable and what feels like a fundamental biological imperative.
Okay, try this exercise. List the masculine traits you tend to criticize publicly. Got them.
Okay.
Now, think honestly about times you've secretly relied on or felt safer because of those exact same traits in someone else. A partner, a colleague, a stranger. Who are you kidding here?
That kind of self-reflection can definitely uncover some uncomfortable truths. Our biases, the complexity of what we actually need versus what we say we value.
And while you're busy pointing fingers at toxic men, maybe consider this. Could it be that some supposedly good men are just too passive? Too timid to actually do anything, good or bad? Is inaction automatically virtuous?
Yeah, the absence of assertiveness isn't always a positive. It can lead to its own problems, its own failures. Passivity isn't necessarily moral strength.
I heard a woman's story once. She said she survived a violent encounter because her then-husband, who she described as kind of a bastard, fought back ferociously. Her previous husband, a very gentle soul, apparently just hid her words. What do you even do with a story like that?
Those kinds of stark anecdotes, they're challenging. They force you to grapple with the limits of certain personality types when faced with real physical danger.
What's the actual cost of demanding constant emotional labor from men, expecting them to always be open, processing, sharing, even when they're struggling under pressure? Is that really progress, or just shifting the burden in a new way?
Pushing unrealistic emotional demands can backfire, surely. It raises questions about fairness, sustainability, and what true support looks like.
You might publicly condemn toxic masculinity, right? But then look at the fiction we consume. Are we often fascinated by those flawed, powerful, maybe even dangerous male characters? Your entertainment choices might be betraying your stated beliefs. Why do we secretly crave what we publicly despise?
Well, fiction offers that safe space, doesn't it? To explore the complexities, the ambiguities, even the darker sides of human nature, including masculinity, without real-world consequences.
Maybe it's simpler. Maybe it's not the toxic traits themselves that are inherently dangerous. Maybe it's just undisciplined traits. The problem isn't the tool strength, aggression, focus, but the hand wielding it without wisdom, without control.
I think that's a much more constructive way to look at it. The focus shifts to cultivating self-awareness, responsibility, the ethical use of our capacities, whatever they may be.
And ask yourself, who really benefits from pushing the narrative that strong male traits are inherently toxic? Follow the power. Think about it.
Yeah, it's always worth critically examining who shapes these narratives and what underlying motivations or power dynamics might be at play.
I'll admit something. Years ago, I used to label any kind of male strength or assertiveness that I personally lacked or maybe feared as toxic. It was easier. My own insecurity was defining their supposed toxicity. Think about that.
That's incredibly honest. And it shows how easily our own personal stuff, our fears, our insecurities can warp our judgments of others.
Carl Jung said people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Are we branding whole aspects of masculinity toxic to avoid confronting our own uncomfortable primal needs, our own shadows?
It's a deep question. Are our external judgments sometimes just projections? A way to avoid looking at the parts of ourselves or the needs within ourselves that make us uncomfortable.
I bet there's a scenario playing in your head right now, listener. A situation where only a so-called toxic man could provide the solution. You might not want to admit it, but it's probably there.
That's a direct challenge to confront those implicit biases, those needs we might prefer to keep hidden, even from ourselves.
Have you ever just desperately wanted someone to take charge? even if they weren't the most sensitive person in the room. Just because you were too tired, too scared, too overwhelmed to handle it yourself. Be really honest.
That taps into something pretty universal, I think. That occasional need for someone else to be strong, decisive, to take the reins when we feel we can't.
Maybe there's no universal good or bad masculine trait outside of context. Maybe there's just what is effective, what is protective, or what is destructive, depending on the brutal reality of the situation.
Ethics and morality often do become incredibly context dependent, don't they? Especially when survival or extreme stakes are involved, the lines get very blurry.
And maybe the man we label toxic is just filling a necessary, if unpleasant, role that society secretly needs, but is afraid to acknowledge openly, making him a convenient scapegoat.
It flips the script, suggesting a more complex, maybe symbiotic relationship between different kinds of masculine expression within a society.
So, strip away all the modern labels for a second. What raw, fundamental masculine functions have historically ensured survival? Protection, provision, maybe assertion. How does that square with your theories about what's acceptable today?
It pushes for a more fundamental, perhaps evolutionary understanding of these traits, moving beyond just social constructs, while still acknowledging context matters hugely.
Simply shaming the uncomfortable aspects of masculinity won't make them vanish. It never works long term. But maybe understanding their roots, their potential function, might lead to healthier integration.
Absolutely. Real progress usually comes from understanding and nuanced engagement, not just blanket condemnation and shame.
Okay, stark choice. An invasion is happening tomorrow. Who are you sending to the front line? The debate team, skilled in nuanced argument. Or the soldiers you might privately call toxic for their aggression? Your gut answer tells you something important.
Extreme threats often demand extreme, or at least highly specialized responses. It highlights the difference between peacetime ideals and crisis necessities.
Sometimes, just sometimes, the demand for male vulnerability isn't actually about their well-being. It's about your comfort, maybe even your control.
Power dynamics are sneaky. They can hide within seemingly positive social expectations. Worth examining motives.
Imagine future historians looking back at our current obsession with toxic masculinity. Will they see it as a period of enlightenment or profound self-deception?
Historical perspective often reveals the blind spots and biases of previous eras. What will ours look like?
Maybe a truly healthy man isn't one who's purged his inner darkness. Maybe he's one who understands it, embraces it even, and learns to wield it responsibly, maybe even terrifyingly so, when necessary.
That suggests a more integrated whole view of masculinity, acknowledging complexity rather than striving for an impossible purity.
Another confession. I know I have personally benefited from actions driven by traits I would later judge as toxic once the danger passed. The hypocrisy. It stings when you admit it.
Our judgments are definitely filtered through our own sense of safety and comfort at any given moment. It's hard to be objective when you feel threatened or once you feel safe again.
Society seems to demand both the lamb and the lion from men. Maybe it's time we just admitted that the world, unfortunately, sometimes desperately needs the lion.
The contradictions in societal expectations are immense. Acknowledging the necessity of different archetypes, even the uncomfortable ones, might be a step towards realism.
So back to the core question. When would you find toxic masculinity, or at least the traits labeled as such, not just acceptable, but necessary? Dare to answer that honestly, just to yourself.
It challenges you to pinpoint your own breaking point, where principles might yield to pragmatism in a crisis.
Because ultimately, the need for what you condemn, it isn't just out there, in them. That shadow, that potential, that need for decisive, maybe even ruthless action in extremis, it's in you too.
It connects back to universal human needs and potentials, the primal instincts that might clash with our more civilized ideals.
Maybe listen to this again later. Let the discomfort sink in. See where it feels personal this time.
Deeper reflection often unlocks insights that aren't obvious on the first pass.
And seriously, send this to someone you know holds the completely opposite view. Don't add commentary. Just let the friction do the teaching.
Because that friction, that engagement with opposing ideas, even if it's uncomfortable, that's often where real learning happens.
This is the deep dive. Keep questioning everything, especially the things that feel comfortable.